Plop, plop, plop. My eyes started blinking, confused as to what was dripping on my face as more cold, wet droplets I discovered were dripping all over my body. My hands scrambled to find the ground as I rolled over in the rain. It was cold and muddy. I remember my hands made the saturated earth squish below me as I found it. I was trying to figure out what had happened. A million questions racing through my mind in a single instance. Then, as I forced a hard push off the ground, came my first inclination that something was wrong. Something was horribly wrong. "Oh, Mother Hubbard," I exclaimed. The exclamation was one that I'd used since childhood when I realized just how seriously my foster parents took swearing. They really were the fire and brimstone type. They actually believed they could beat the Bible into me, or at least the evil out. "This world is evil, child," they would say, "but you must do what you can to help people remain good, even if it hurts to help them." Well, I held my hand to my head. A throbbing pain threatened to burst my skull wide open, but despite the vigorous pounding in my skull, I slowly pushed myself up, shaking from the cold and pain that made my eyes want to pop out. I started to look around. I was confused by my surroundings. I stood a little ways in front of a small cabin with no discernible roads nearby. Only a long driveway that disappeared around a bend before being engulfed by the forest around it was visible as a means of exit. Surrounding the cabin and myself was a dense, dripping green forest and dark night sky with a big moon hanging in the air. It was starting to peek out now that the rain had stopped, and I remember saying out loud, "Where am I?" I had no recollection of where I was or how I got there. Actually, come to think of it, I didn't remember much of anything at the time. I'd have some glimpses of my childhood and early teenage years, but, well, I felt older. I was guessing myself to be at least late 20s, maybe even early to mid-30s. Who am I? I asked myself. A small bit of panic came over me as I still clung to my pounding head, feeling dizzy and disoriented. Then a memory from when I was small came flooding back into the forefront of my mind. It was someone calling for me. Zan. Yes, that must be my name, I thought. Zan. I stammered around in a bit of shock before I noticed a bloodied rock planted in the ground where I'd just been laying. Reactively, I lifted my hand to my head. Sure enough, it was covered in that same blood. Now, I don't know how head injuries work. How you can forget so much but still remember how to speak, write, and guess as to what is happening when you're so confused and in pain, but, well, I remember thinking to myself, I must have amnesia. Because, for the life of me, I had no clue about my surroundings, how I got there, or, hell, even where I had worked and lived. The panic was burning now, and out of instinct, I clumsily ran to the cabin with my head throbbing and started beating on the door. I beat my fists upon it as hard as I could and shouted loudly, making my head hurt even worse. "Hello? Please, I need help," I shouted. I could hear a TV was on inside, and the voices of some show were loud and clear, but nothing else. I pounded and shouted some more, but no one ever came. So, figuring I was injured and this was an emergency, I wasn't waiting any longer. I turned the knob, and the door opened. I proceeded to walk into the cabin slowly, scanning the room as if to find somebody, but nobody was there. "Hello?" I said in a more mousy tone now, in case the owner was there and was mad that I was in their home. But nothing. So I searched around for a phone, but didn't see one. I was starting to feel tired due to my head injury, but I knew that I couldn't fall asleep. So I walked down the hallway to the left of the front room, found the bathroom, and started washing the blood off my head and hands. God, it was all over me, though. This must be a deep cut, I thought, noticing how much blood there was. I finished cleaning the wound to the best of my disoriented abilities, and then went back to the kitchen behind the living room. I opened the freezer, and luckily there were some ice cubes left in a tray, so I pulled them out, grabbed a paper towel from the roll sitting on the counter, wrapped it, and placed them on my head. I went and sat back on the sofa, looking at the clock, which read 8:02 p.m. I sat there thinking some more and came up with a plan to wait for the owner of the cabin to arrive back home so I could ask for help. And that's when things started to take a turn for the worse. I'd been sitting on the couch for all of 10 minutes or so when I heard a voice laughing in a low, sinister growl. The room started getting dark and distorted to a scene of just horrid evil. It was like when you faint and your vision blurs and dims as it narrows, but I was fully awake. Rotting wood walls, disgusting bugs crawling around, dirty torn curtains, and a foul stench of rotten fish and vomit now filled the cabin that I'd been in. "How does it feel to know you're going to die here?" it asked. I was terrified and ran screaming to a rotten wooden table. I threw myself underneath it, wrapped myself in a ball, and tried to remain as quiet as possible so the source of the voice couldn't find me. Some time passed, and I peeked a glance from the smallest opening my eyes could make and was immediately perplexed. As I took in my surroundings, I realized I was under the kitchen table back in the cabin and everything was back to normal. I caught a glimpse of the clock again. It now read 9:24 p.m. My brain was scrambling to find an explanation as it ached but was fully awake. "My brain," I said, remembering my head injury. I was having an hallucination. Thank God. The answer both calmed and terrified me, but I crawled out from under the table where I'd been hiding and plopped myself down into a chair. I took in the scene to distract myself. A jacket laid across the end of the table. Salt and pepper shakers were neatly sitting in the middle by a centerpiece of fresh flowers. The honey-colored wood was draped with a red and white tablecloth that had a pattern of apples on it, and a plate setting set in front of every chair. That's when I realized there was a pile of mail in a holder leaning against the centerpiece. I didn't want to be nosy, but I was curious if I knew the person that owned the cabin, and so I reached for a letter. Just then I heard a loud bang that sounded like a 1,000-pound hammer hitting the world's largest nail. I jumped and looked around as the sound was ringing in my ears. I didn't see or could sense where the sound had come from, so I got up and started looking out of the kitchen window. I looked, squinting through the glass, and didn't see the cause of the noise, but something did catch my eye. There was a carport in the back of the cabin that was big enough for one vehicle to squeeze into, and there was a car sitting right there. This entire time it never occurred to me that the cabin owner might have been someone that had brought me here, but where were they? And who were they? Before I could even think to go check the mail on the table again, boom! A loud, thunderous roar came crashing over me as the room started distorting again. The walls creaked and moaned as they transformed into the rotten, grotesque scene. But this time I could hear screeching metal sounds also, as if someone was turning a crank and gears, which were grinding with its force. A loud, blood-curdling shriek let out from an unfamiliar woman's voice. It sounded like she was screaming from torturous pain. Then I heard a low, growling voice again, laughing. "Scream as loud as you want. I actually prefer when you do." And then it became frantic with excitement. It was whispering, but loud enough for me to hear horrible things like, "There'll be no quiet death for you, my dear. No, no, no. But die you will. Yes, you will die, but first." Oh, it screamed first. "You will suffer until your body gives out. I will break every bone, rip every piece of flesh, and burn each eye until there's nothing left. You will not see, speak, hear, or even feel any evil when I'm done." I was frozen in fear, standing in a rotten house listening to the noises that seemed to be coming from below me. I didn't want to move in case of the rotted wood either giving out or alarming the voice to my presence. And so I stood there, still, feeling like a coward for not helping the woman scream, but knowing I was in no shape to do any good in my condition. So I listened for what felt like hours to this woman crying in pain as her bones were broken. I heard her pass out a couple of times, and each time the torture ceased until she was conscious and screaming again. My mind was so appalled when her skin started to be filleted off that I had to cover my mouth to not vomit all over the floor. Even though I was upstairs and they were in what sounded to be the basement, I could still hear through the holes in the decaying floor, each piece being sliced and smacking the ground with a wet splat. "Well, that ended too soon," I heard a voice say in disappointment. It was cold and heartless as it spoke, and I thought to myself, what did I do to deserve this hell? The sound of footsteps coming up the stairs snapped me out of my thoughts, and I realized I'd be completely exposed to the villain once he, she, or it topped the creaking stairs. I wasn't ruling out the supernatural right now, because what had just happened could only be done by a monster, human or otherwise. I turned and started running through the decimated house, trying desperately to evade capture. The commotion I'd created must have alerted the murderous psychopath to my presence, because I then heard a loud, angry growl and pounding footsteps followed. I was lost in the house. Every door and window I could see in the dark place was boarded up and nailed shut. It was close behind me now, still growling. I shrunk down and screamed. I was screaming and waiting for the inevitable when I noticed that I'd been screaming for too long. It should have gotten me by now, I thought. I opened my eyes just a bit and realized I was back in the safety of the cabin. My heart was pounding, and the whiplash of being thrown back and forth between two realities had my head scrambling to figure out which was real. I was in a bedroom now. Everything was dark except for the glowing red light of an alarm clock beside the bed. 10:45 p.m. Where was the owner of the cabin? I needed desperate medical attention now. Remembering the mail on the table, I made my way out of the bedroom towards the kitchen, and was halfway there before I got a flash in front of my eyes. I was back in the dark house, but this time it was different. It was more like remembering something rather than hallucinating. The flash was blurry and I couldn't make out any objects really, but the layout felt the same. I felt my skin was hot and damp. I remembered holding something heavy in my hands as I walked through the house. Questions raced through my mind. Was the dilapidated house real? And if so, had I been there? A victim of its horrors, maybe. God, I hope not. The view of the car entered my vision and snapped my mind back to reality. The owner of the cabin still hadn't arrived, so seeing how this was an emergency, I could just borrow it, I thought to myself, then I'd make sure it was returned safely. For all I knew, the owner was in desperate need of attention as well and needed me to go find help. That, I would later find out, was entirely correct. I ran to the car still dizzy from my head wound. Just follow the driveway and pick a direction. I'm bound to find someone eventually, I thought out loud. The door handle was in my hand as I pulled back and hopped in. Keys, keys. Where are the frog jam keys? Yeah, another phrase I used to hide my cursing. The keys were nowhere to be found, though, so I hurried my way back into the house before another hallucination could overcome me. I was tossing things everywhere, desperately trying to find the keys, but to no avail. I checked the jacket pocket, and then my own. Nothing. Well, it must not be my car, I thought. But then again, what's a little Grand Theft Auto when you're in fear for your life? I scanned the room nervously when a door caught my eye. I hadn't really noticed it before, but it was slightly ajar, sitting in the right-hand corner of the kitchen. I made my way to it and pulled it back. There were stairs leading down to what looked to be a basement and a horrible stench wafting out from below. I grunted as I covered my nose with my arm and slowly made my way down the steps. I slipped down them cautiously one by one until the room came into view. I was horrified. When I reached the bottom, I saw a scene that I could only describe as a high-budget Hollywood horror set. There, a little ways in front of me, was a woman, I think, with her arms and legs bound to wires that were pulled tight. My eyes followed them up to the gears they were attached to, with a crank that sat behind them. There was no skin left on her body. Every bone was splintered and her eyes looked to be burned out. "Oh, my God," I gasped. "This is from my visions. I wasn't hallucinating, I was remembering." My legs froze from the realization, but my eyes scanned the room in fear. There were more sinister devices and contraptions all across the basement. And there, beside the dead woman to the left, was a metal bed of sorts, with holes drilled into it like Swiss cheese. Beside the bed on the tray table was a box of enormously long nails. I didn't need the owner's manual to know its purpose was truly evil. To my right, all the way against the wall, was a tank of sorts with some kind of lines dangling down inside. I felt as though it was beckoning me towards it. My feet started to move. I reached the tank and could now make out the rusted metal chains piercing down through the water. My eyes followed the chains down on their own. Something in my head was telling me not to look, but no matter what I did, they kept dropping lower and lower. I drew a sharp breath in as I gasped and lunged back when they found the bottom. The chains had run into a torso with wrinkly pale grey skin. Atop the torso was an unnaturally twisted neck and a face staring right at me. Well, I guess it was staring, though it had no eyes to do so. It looked as if someone had scooped the cavities of the eyes and mouth clean out with an ice cream scooper. And that image still haunts me to this day. Amongst all of the horrors in the basement, something caught my eye to the right of the tank. It was all the way in the corner, directly beside the stairs. There was a work desk with a cork backdrop. It looked so clean and out of place from everything I'd just seen. I gazed at it, and a small golden object peered back at me. The key! I'd almost forgotten about it by this time, but I hurled myself towards it and snatched it up, turning to head for the stairs. Just as I headed for salvation, another hallucination started to distort my vision. Remembering the monster that had plagued my visions, I swung myself under the rotten stairs and hid as quietly as I could. Nothing in my life had ever scared me the way this thing had. Not even my abusive foster parents made me cower in such fear. I closed my eyes as I heard it begin to speak to a man now strapped to the Swiss cheese table. Now, it said. Don't worry, I will purge all of the sin from your body as well as your soul, my friend. The man screamed through the gag over his mouth, and I heard him kicking, trying to break free of his bindings. Shh, you don't need to fight or try to hide it. We all have sin. Your wife had sin as well, and just look how pure I made her. The man let out a painful whine, and I wished that I was anywhere but where I was in that moment. I looked away, trying to find a way out. To my right was a body hanging from the ceiling. He had hooks protruding through his chest, and just like the woman in the tank, his eyes and mouth were scooped out. To his left in the corner were a number of decomposing bodies with a white powder scattered on top. I assumed this was for the smell, but it wasn't doing shit for my gag reflex. The sight, smell, and pain from my injury mixed together all at once and became too much for my stomach to bear. With a forceful heave, the contents of what was in my stomach projectiled out, splattering to the floor at my feet as I stayed crouched under the stairs. A few more heaves followed before I wiped my mouth, exhausted. I was still trying to catch my breath when I felt something watching me from my left side. Weak, the monster growled, though its face was just a dark blur. You always were weak. Ever since I found you in that foster home, all you've done is make me wish I could cut you clean out of existence. Lucky for you, I need you to survive. My mind was raw, trying to recover and wrap itself around those words as I heard banging on the steps above me. Just a couple, though. Whatever was climbing the stairs was wasting no time, flying up them hard and fast. The monster whirled around and cursed me for my distraction that had let its prey escape. It darted up the stairs in pursuit, and I quickly followed to retreat from the awful smell lingering in my nose. I reached the top of the stairs as I saw the monster's figure make its way hastily to the open door. "Come back, you filthy rat. Come back now." Its sentence was cut short just on the other side of the door. The man had been waiting with a large wooden cutting board he must have grabbed off the kitchen counter. He struck the thing hard on the back of the head and then lunged at it, tackling the creature. They rolled around in the grass for a bit, squaring off before one last tackle sent the thing down to the ground for good. Its head hit hard, splitting off of a rock in the ground. The man then got up and ran for his life down the driveway. I believe I was going into shock by this point. My vision was fading and my body felt weak. I fell on my hands and knees as I crawled towards the creature. Placing my hand on its shoulder and gripping tightly, I tugged it over and rolled it on its back. The face, though, wasn't blurred. No, it had a face now. She was a woman, mid-20s to early 30s. As I knelt there in awe of what I was seeing, the entire body, face included, faded away and was replaced by blue and red lights bouncing off of the wet grass. "Ma'am," a voice yelled, "put your hands where I can see them. You're under arrest." Hey there. Thank you so much for taking the time to drop by and listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me. I put a lot of time and effort into making these videos, so it's nice to know that there's someone out there listening. Do me a little favor, would you? Click that like button, leave a comment, and if you really feel like it, why not subscribe too? Okay, happy tales everyone. See you soon.